Almost immediately gets it in there.
There he goes.
There's
There's the tap. Only 2 minutes and the Motown Phenom lives up to the name and gets himself back in the win column.
Alright, so Kevin Lee just returned to MMA this past weekend after being retired for like 17 minutes, and honestly, this guy is such an anomaly to me, and I really don't mean that in a good way, like how Dricus du Plessis is an anomaly. And if you're anything like me, then you might mistakenly think that this is at least Kevin's second or third time coming out of retirement, but in all reality, the guy has only officially retired once, which came as a bit of a surprise to me at least. Because this guy's career has been so filled with ups and downs that I really thought that he walked out the door only to come back again multiple times now. To Kevin's credit though, he did win his comeback fight on Saturday in less than 2 minutes, but as you can probably expect, he was not fighting anyone even remotely close to his skill level, so of course the fight went the way that it did. And it seems like he's staying busy because he already has a bare knuckle MMA fight scheduled for next month in Jorge Masvidal's Gamebred FC. But the thing is, now that Kevin is back competing in MMA, he finds himself in such a weird, uncertain, and kinda depressing place in his career where he's literally fighting in warehouses to a crowd of like 50 people. And based on the tumultuous nature of his 2 UFC runs, he really has no clear direction on a long-term path forward. Because yes, he is making some money to support himself, and I'm sure that money became a big issue for Kevin during his retirement, and I'll get to that in a moment. But even though Kevin has literally offered to fight on the Contender Series in order to prove he's still UFC material, Dana has seemingly ghosted him, and I highly doubt we're ever going to see him fight for the UFC ever again. And in spite of the fact that Kevin didn't have a great UFC record upon retiring, I really get the feeling that they cut ties with him for reasons beyond just his fighting abilities. But before we get into Kevin's mouth burning his bridge with Dana in the UFC, first I want to quickly go over his career up to this point and just generally give my thoughts on him as an athlete. Right off the bat, I think that Kevin had all the potential in the world to do some really impressive stuff as a UFC fighter. I mean, he was signed to the promotion at 21 years old, and although he lost a unanimous decision in a really tough debut fight against Al Iaquinta, who was on a 3-fight win streak in the UFC, he looked pretty good in spite of the circumstances. Kevin followed up his first career loss by beating his next 4 opponents, with the 4th win being a submission victory over James Muntasri before he got TKO'd in the first round by Leonardo Santos. But he was able to bounce back from this loss by racking up a 5-fight win streak that includes 4 finishes over pretty noteworthy opponents in Jake Matthews, Magomed Mustafayev, Francisco Trinaldo, and of course Michael Chiesa.
I know his mama got tickets, so
shut the fuck up about, hey, don't talk about my mom for one. Don't you ever talk about my mom. Don't you ever talk about my fucking mom. Don't you ever talk about my fucking mom.
Dad,
might want to get in the middle.
like whatever you want to call it.
I'll smack the fuck out of you right now. Don't you ever talk about my mom. What's good?
Honestly, he looked really good in all of these wins to the point where he was given an interim title shot against Tony Ferguson, who was on a 9-fight win streak and was considered the boogeyman of the division. But as we all know by now, this fight wouldn't go his way, and even though he had a great first round, his conditioning just couldn't keep up with his pace and he got submitted in the 3rd. Though to be fair to Kevin, he showed a lot of promise in this fight, but his mistake of pushing the pace way too hard in the first round would come back to haunt him again and again throughout the remainder of his UFC run. Because after starting off his MMA career with a very respectable 16-3 record, in his next 8 fights before retiring, he would go 3-5, and almost all of these losses followed the same trend of Kevin gassing himself out after fighting like he left the stove running in the first round. And sure, Kevin had some really good wins sprinkled in amongst all of these losses, like his victories over Edson Barbosa and Gregor Gillespie, but his 3rd win was a really hard-fought decision against a 40-year-old Diego Sanchez, where he really shouldn't have struggled to get the win as much as he did. Not to mention, this fight was right after he was released from the UFC after losing a decision to D-Rod, where it would later be revealed he tested positive with Adderall in his system, even though he had a prescription for it, but didn't disclose it to the UFC, which is baffling to me. And right after he was released, Kevin would publicly complain about what he was paid in the promotion by saying that it sucks to be famous but not be rich, and he bragged about how much more money he would be making in Khabib's Eagle FC, which is absolutely not something that Dana was pleased to hear, I'm sure. Nevertheless, after the Diego win, the UFC somehow re-signed Kevin, but he would immediately lose his comeback fight in less than a minute to Rinat Fakhretdinov. 10 days after the loss to Rinat, Kevin would announce that he was retiring via Instagram, only to unretire 6 months later in February of this year. And this now brings us to present day, where Kevin now finds himself fighting in regional promotions that I've never heard of. Look, I've always considered myself a fan of Lee, and even though he can definitely come off as a little bit of an arrogant douche sometimes, I always enjoyed watching him fight. And sure, he's always had major issues when it came to his fighting game, but his athletic qualities and tenacity in the ring made him a difficult problem to solve even in many of his losses. So with all this being said, I think it's a shame that Kevin finds himself where he's currently at in his career, and honestly, I think it's probably safe to assume that he came out of retirement because he's having money problems. I mean, I don't have any evidence to back this up with, but I doubt that Kevin came out of retirement in 6 months because he all of a sudden rediscovered his love for the sport or whatever. And as is the case for many fighters who continue to fight due to financial hardship, I think that there's a pretty strong possibility that we'll see Kevin bounce around fighting in one small promotion to the next in order to keep his head above water. However, when it comes to Kevin's relationship with the UFC, I really get the feeling that he burned his bridge with Dana as a result of some of the public comments he's made throughout the years. I already brought up that he called out the UFC for not paying him properly and for saying Eagle FC would be treating him much better after he got released, but also during this time, he called out Dana and Hunter for the way that they handled his UFC release by saying that it was a dick move for them to let him go without telling him personally. Then just a couple of days ago, in an interview with Mike Heck, Kevin cites another possible reason for Dana being displeased with him when prior to his fight with Fakhretdinov, Kevin said that him fighting at the Apex was kind of stupid.
I think I'm very opinionated, and I think that may have rubbed Dana wrong a few times, you know. I made some comments about the Apex Center, and I guess that may be rubbing wrong. But listen, this is what I do. This is part of being me. If people ask me a question, I give them a true and honest answer.
And for your return to the organization, is there any part of you that wishes that this fight was like in a sold-out arena, or does it not matter to you?
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. Yeah, I wish it was. I'm kind of, yeah, I wish it was in front of more fans. You know, I don't know how many people are gonna be at Apex, but it's kind of stupid. I don't know what we're doing. You know what I mean? The pandemic over. I don't know if people got the message or, you know, if they sent out the telegram, but the pandemic is over. I don't know what we still doing here. I get that it's money to be had, but
honestly, this was a dumb thing for Kevin to say, especially seeing as he was kind of gifted a spot back into the UFC roster just a couple of weeks prior. Don't get me wrong, I agree with Kevin here. The UFC's over-reliance on the Apex is in fact really stupid, but given the circumstances of his situation, he should have been smarter with his response, and he shouldn't have said something that makes Dana look bad, even though what he said was objectively the truth. I think it's also important to note here that in this clip, Kevin makes it a point to say that there were a few times where the things that he said might have rubbed Dana the wrong way. And I personally can't find too many other examples of Kevin making public comments that made the UFC look bad, so Kevin's probably referencing things that he said in private to Dana that put him on his bad side. Furthermore, I don't understand how Kevin has the audacity to say that he doesn't understand why the UFC wouldn't want to re-sign him here in 2024. Like, dude, what do you mean you don't understand? The last time that they re-signed you, you immediately retired after you lost the fight. Honestly, if I were in Dana's shoes and I gave Kevin another shot in the UFC only for him to get submitted in 60 seconds and then retire 10 days later, I probably wouldn't want to work with him again either. Because at the end of the day, if it was just a matter of how well Kevin can fight, I really feel like he can still hang with the unranked fighters at either 155 or 170. Sure, he'll win some and lose some, but how is that any different from, say, Michael Johnson or Alex Caceres? And I'm not sure if Kevin's apparent obliviousness about the situation stems from a sense of entitlement, a lack of accountability, or just straight up delusion, but I guess it could be all of those things combined. Who knows, maybe the PFL or Bellator or 1FC will pick him up, but honestly, seeing as none of them have signed him yet, I really have my doubts. Yeah, man, I don't know. In my opinion, Kevin Lee is a very, very strange case in MMA history. He not only made terrible decisions during his fights in which it often cost him a chance at victory, but he also made terrible decisions when it came to his career choices. Whether it be from bad-mouthing the UFC when he was already on thin ice to not disclosing his Adderall prescription even though it would have been so easy for him to do so, he just just repeatedly did and said stupid things that most people would have the better judgment not to, and I think that he finds himself in his current position as a result of him fumbling over his own feet. Anyways, that's the video for today. Definitely let me know what you think about how Kevin's career went from promising to depressing in a span of like 5 years. Do you think Kevin can make it back to the big leagues of MMA, or do you think he's destined to be regulated to the B-tier promotions for the rest of his career? As always, if you liked the video, then like the video, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so. I appreciate you guys for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.